Welcome. I'm Glen Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. One of the recurring themes in this TV series is that we are all interconnected. No matter what issues we address on this program, we find ourselves very often affirming our common humanity across nations, across social and economic groups, and so forth. This month's program takes a fresh look at people who are in the military on active duty and veterans who have served in the military. While the peace movement opposes wars and our violent foreign policy, we recognize that the individuals who serve or have served in the military are human beings just like ourselves, and they are literally our brothers and sisters. Some members of the peace movement, like our two guests for this program, have served in the military. The peace movement recognizes the humanity with all people who are victims of war, and indeed, many people who serve in the military are also victims of war. Just as we want civilians to be healed and restored to peace, so also we want health and peace for all who have served in the military. It's only fair that GIs and veterans be able to fully exercise their rights related to the benefits for which they're eligible. And these are the themes that we'll be exploring during this program. I'm happy to welcome Dennis Mills and Mark Fleming. Both Dennis and Mark served in the United States Army during the Vietnam era. Both are very active now in the peace movement. Both of these guests are active with Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, the Rachel Corrie chapter in Olympia, Washington. And Dennis is very active also with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. Both Dennis and Mark volunteer significant time and effort at the Coffee Strong Coffee House south of Tacoma, Washington, where they help active duty GIs and veterans know about their rights and claim their rightful benefits. And Mark has qualified as an independent VA accredited claims agent. So I'm happy to welcome Dennis Mills and Mark Fleming. We will have a very informative hour with information that probably not too many of our viewers know enough about. So welcome, good to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's just briefly lay out what it is that you do as volunteers at Coffee Strong. People should know that the Coffee Strong Coffee House was named after that Army slogan, yes. Army Strong. And if you're going to have a coffee house next to an Army base, you might as well name it Coffee Strong. So tell us about the, just briefly.
Coffee Strong is a GI-owned and GI-operated coffee house just off of exit 122 off of Highway 5 near Lakewood, Washington. And it serves coffee to predominantly GIs that come in free, and they have an internet cafe there. But where Mark and I became involved with it is that we see a lot of GIs and also veterans coming through that have some claims that they're interested in getting some compensation or health care. And that's where we started saying, well, maybe we should sit in and just talk on Fridays, and that's how we got involved.
Right, and so pretty much every Friday, one or both of you will be up there from, currently it's 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It may change if people are watching this program substantially later than our taping date. But anyway, you're up there volunteering and helping these folks out.
Right, and part of it is people just don't know how to access the process. So this is something we do. We can help them figure it out, what they can get and how they go about it.
It used to be a very complicated process at one time. What was it, 16 pages?
16 pages to apply.
And that really put a lot of people off. And now it's really online thing, but we really help them saying, here's what you need to know to file successfully.
Yeah.
Because if they don't know what they're doing, it can be turned down, and then it's a 6-month to 9-month appeal process. And
Yeah.
we're there to help them know what they need to have in place to file.
Dennis, one of the things that you've mentioned is that war changes people. When
Yes.
and you've said that the person who gets deployed is a different person when he or she comes home. Tell us some more about
Well,
that.
that combat experience changes people. They come home from the war, but the war actually comes home with them. And many times it is a psychological wound of them having been in combat or having experienced death. And many times what we see that as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but we also see other things such as brain injuries, TBI we call it, traumatic brain injuries. And that's a little harder to deal with. And they're coming home with those things, and how they relate to others is really difficult. And so we're seeing them come in all the time, not just with physical wounds that they need to get treated for, like a knee that hurts, but also they have some mental issues, and that triggers other mental things which can be a challenge.
And it also makes it difficult for them to follow through a process that can seem pretty complicated if you haven't paid attention to it.
Well, a lot of people don't like to deal with bureaucracies.
Right.
It's like a foreign subject.
Yes, yes.
And so if you're not geared that way, it's a barrier.
And some of the issues that Mark and I are trying to get them to file on trigger other things, which then become the more predominant issue that they're dealing with. But we're trying to get them back into getting them care and also compensation for their war-related injury.
So I heard you folks talk about the large numbers of people who've been affected by war. Tell us what kind of numbers we're talking
Well,
about.
in the United States, there's at least almost a third of the people that have been related to the military in one way or another. And in the state of Washington, which is pretty amazing, over 667,000
Something like that.
have served in the military. And currently, Mark and I are now working very hard right now with the Vietnam veterans, because we have some 225,000, almost 250,000 people that served in country, and some of the health issues that they're beginning to experience is related to their service. And so we're looking at 250,000 right now in the state of Washington.
And we'll talk about some of these delayed effects a little bit later in the program, that just because somebody's military service was decades ago doesn't mean that you can't apply now.
Well,
That's
and
correct.
it's not
We'll get
only
into
the person, the veteran that we're talking about, but sometimes it's their dependent and their survivors that are eligible for some of the compensation.
I think you had said that like every 5 minutes somebody walks into a VA.
A VA health center or a hospital, yes.
Let's see, what kinds of injuries, whether physical or unseen, visible or invisible, are people doing? You mentioned
Actually, when
some.
we're seeing a variety of them, I mean, typically someone will come in, the classic one is they had some direct injury. They were wounded in the shoulder, they fell, there was something physically wrong with something specific. And very often, if you talk to them a bit, you might find out, well, there's more to it. They're having nightmares. They're having, they injured this shoulder, but because of they're having to compensate, their other shoulder is a problem, or they're seeing additional problems. So very often, if you interview this person and talk to them, you can get a sense that, well, there's several things we can claim. And one thing you can do with these claims is you file, you list out everything you think the VA should look at, and they have to look at that and say yes or no.
And it's typical, and Mark, you can relate to the fact that we had a person come in with just maybe 1 or 2, and by the time that we finished going through them, what we call from head to toe, because we ask certain questions, and we have that credibility of having served that we can speak their language. We would say, how many times did you hit the deck? Well, to the civilian audience, that doesn't mean a whole lot. But to the veteran, that means full body armor with a pack, 120 pounds, hitting the thing, and that has an impact on your body.
Right.
But how many claims did, we landed up with that one person?
Well, I'm thinking someone came in, it had about 1 or 2 items. We had about 11 by the time we finished. We had another one who had been, he's still in active duty, and they were considering medical issues. They had about 9. He went to the VA and they identified 27.
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're not settling for just the superficial or the whatever's the presenting illness, but you're getting into it deep enough. You're so thorough because I know from the work that you're doing, you're approaching these people with compassion and understanding, and you're really trying to help them out. And when you get into that kind of thoroughness, then the other things will surface.
Well, and many times it's just, Glenn, listening to the person, and sometimes it's the first time that they've been listened to in a long time.
Let's see, I think you'd mentioned hearing loss.
Yes, most of the people that have been in combat have been around large noises, whether it's from mortars or grenades or whatever the sound was. Even in their advanced infantry training, they're around large noises, and that noise has had an impact to where they develop hearing problems, where there's a ringing in the ear. We call it tinnitus, and that is compensatable right now. Any veteran who has this, even if they don't get compensation for that hearing loss, will get hearing aids for the rest of their life. And we're looking at $2,000-3,000 for just the hearing aids. And just about all the people that have been around an infantry unit
will have that issue.
will have that issue. And some, for the first time, are saying, Dennis, Mark, what's this thing about hearing loss and hearing aids? Because I have that problem. And they've been quiet about this for maybe 30 or more years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I said, you should apply as soon as you get out, as soon as you realize you have an issue. But very often people don't realize that until many years later, and you can still make those claims.
And there's also sort of a cultural thing that says, you don't want to be a whiner, you don't want to be a baby about it, you got to be a tough guy, just suffer in silence, that kind of a cultural thing. That would be a barrier.
Well, many times if you're in country in a combat situation and you're hurt, they give you a pain med, nothing more than a strong Tylenol, and back on duty.
And there's also an ethos that says, well, I'm hurt, but this is my unit. I need to be with them. I don't care. So it's a combination of both command influence and the soldier's own desire.
Yeah, loyalty to the group, and people count on each other.
And that's an extreme
powerful
bond.
But what we're also finding with our veterans is that they've had an injury, but that injury has become more aggravated because they've compensated for it. Let's say they've had a knee problem, so they favored the other knee over a period of time. And now that they're getting to be our age, they're developing arthritis and other type of things. And most of them don't realize they can be compensated for that because it was an injury related to their service overseas.
A while back I heard a presentation you made about traumatic brain injury, which you've said is sort of the signature injury of this war. Tell us what traumatic brain injury, or TBI, is.
Yeah, TBI is an injury to the brain when there is a concussion or a loud explosion where the brain is very soft and it's like it's enveloped in jello, but it'll be a backward motion and then the brain will go forward. And so it strikes back and forth, and there's some severe damage that's caused by this. And we're seeing these TBIs caused by, here's another acronym, IED, which is an improvised explosive device. And we're seeing this more in Afghanistan than we are in Iraq, although it happened in Iraq quite a bit too. And people are coming home and they think it's maybe PTSD, and it's not. It's a traumatic brain injury, and they're not being tested adequately. Remember the one test we had with one guy when we says, how many IEDs did you go through?
He said 40 or something.
40, and
or I lost count.
He lost count after 40 and a blowing out eardrum. And we says, well, what test did they give you? And they says, well, they gave me a word association test. Do you remember my expression at the time, Mark? And I says, hold out your hand. And he held out his hand. And I says, a word association test, huh?
Yeah, so I mean, there is neurological damage, and you know, people just very often when you come back from that situation, you just want to put it behind you. So even if you're just trying to avoid being a whiner, you know, you just say, I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned PTSD just now, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
In World War I, it was called shell shock.
Yes.
In World War II, the same symptoms were called battle fatigue. And now, since Vietnam, it's been referred to as post-traumatic stress disorder.
Well, even in the Civil War, it was called soldier's heart.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. I guess I'm not as old as you are. I wouldn't.
And the fact that it's
remember
called
that
a disorder makes it very difficult for soldiers to recognize that. I mean, it's an injury, yet it's a disorder, and I'm a tough soldier, so I don't have a disorder.
Yeah, it sounds like a psychological problem.
There's another
so
term
it's-
now called combat stress injury. And that, you know, you think about that in the terms that it's a wound that can heal as opposed to disorder, which is something wrong with me.
Well, and that's why we talk about the unseen wounds of war,
Right.
where we're seeing just about everyone that's been deployed by the Department of Defense own statistic. Well over 37% will have issues with PTSD as a result of them being in a combat situation.
And then that affects not just them, but their friends, family members.
The community at large.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, you know, it's not uncommon for people, if you were to go down the street, and you probably heard me say this before, Glenn, is I'll go up to a person and say, what war were you in?
Yeah.
And, you know, some of the people that were never around, it's just, that's a strange question to ask. I said, did you hear the answer? And they will tell you what battle, what war it was.
Yeah.
And they were on the street because they have not had their needs met.
Yeah, there's a very high rate of homelessness
Yes.
and substance abuse, all kinds of stuff.
And
coming
loss
out
of
this.
relationships, divorce is very
Yeah.
rampant.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in the community here as soldiers come back to Fort Lewis.
Yeah.
High rate of divorce, drunken driving, domestic abuse.
Yeah.
Dependency issues of alcohol and other drugs.
It's become known, not reported enough, but become known somewhat, that the Department of Defense does several things to try to avoid taking responsibility for the damage that it's caused to people.
Right.
And I wonder if you could tell us about some of their
and Mark, we
methods.
see a
Yeah.
lot of people coming in that are in uniform.
And they're in some kind of a process. I mean, a classic one is, it's called chaptering out, an administrative discharge. The person can no longer function as a soldier, and they say, well, it's a personality discharge. It's your problem, not ours. And they will typically give them a general discharge, which bars them from education benefits. And in some cases, they might even give them a less than honorable discharge, which bars them from any benefits.
And if they lose their education benefits and they've paid into it, they
lose
lose
that as
what
well.
they paid into it,
Yes.
and they don't tell you that very much when you
No.
recruit.
And one of the things we're doing at Coffee Strong with these people is, you know, we're telling them that there's a very definite process that you go through. They have to do certain things. And one of my favorites is I will print out a copy of the regs and say, you know, here are the things they have to tell you. And if they don't give you this information, if they don't give you the time, then you can demand it. And that's hard to do if you're, you know, an E4 and your first sergeant is barking down at you.
Now, one of the things you should know, Glenn, and our listening audience, is we're talking generally about veterans benefits, but we move into an area which is not our expertise, which is GI rights information. And Coffee Strong is another place for people to come and get that type of information.
Right, and there is a GI rights hotline, which is toll free. You can call it at no cost, 877 447 4487, and they have a website, www.girightshotline.org, and we'll include that in the credits at the end of the program.
And we get people coming in, and we thought, they're not here to talk with Mark and myself, yet we'll talk with them.
Yeah.
They're here because they need GI rights information, and we
Yeah.
refer them to where they can get the type of information they want.
And those folks are well trained. It's staffed by volunteers, but they've gone through training like you folks have gone through training,
Yeah.
and they can really help these folks out.
Another thing that we've encountered with active duty is people who are up for some sort of a medical discharge. And the process that gets dragged out, and they say, well, we'll give you this 10% if you just sign now, and it's been 3 months and you sign it to get out. And we had one GI who had an issue with his son who had contracted a disease that the father had brought home and needed this medication, and they were offering him very minimal care.
And that medication was $100,000 a year for a pharmacy.
He was able to stick it out and get the full benefit.
Okay. Well, yeah, one of the things that happens, and this was, there was a great article in The Nation magazine sometime in 2010. I
The
forget which
disposable
month it was.
soldiers.
Yeah, it was about these people who get labeled with a personality disorder, which the military says, well, you don't have an injury from the war, you have a personality disorder. It's a pre-existing condition, and we don't have any responsibility for it. And they're doing this at a vastly increasing rate as a way of avoiding liability.
Well, and that is a challenge too, because we have people with really pretty severe PTSD coming in, and if you want to get them out, you give them crazy orders to follow that they will blow their lid on, and then they will say, oh, Article 15 or personality disorder,
Failure to adapt.
Failure to adapt, get them out of here. You
Okay.
know, and they know that the issue was they have untreated PTSD.
Yeah.
But that was the easy way to get rid of them, so that the Department of Defense does not have to pick up the finances that they would owe that person for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing that in a society where there's so much emphasis on accountability, you know, politicians want to make welfare moms accountable, and they want to make drunk drivers accountable, and they want to make, you know, teachers accountable. They want to make everybody accountable, but the Department of Defense does all these sneaky and even crooked things to avoid accountability to the very people that they've damaged.
Our heroes, supposedly.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the interesting things, they use the term prior personality disorder.
Yes.
Remember hearing that one, Mark? And I asked an individual of very, very high rank, what test did you give to this person when they came into the service that would let you know that they had anything prior? And this person gave me their business card and says, well, call this person in the morning, you know, because I sort of embarrassed and called it for what it was. There was nothing prior, there was no test.
Yeah.
And what we tell all of the people that have any medical issues is once they get through basic training, then the Department of Defense
Has accepted them.
has accepted them. And
Right.
so they can't say, oh, well, you had this when you were 18 years old before you came in. If they made it through that basic training,
They were performing at that time.
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
didn't. That
Yeah.
was their time to discover.
Yeah.
And they didn't, and it didn't go in the record.
Right.
So now we have, they have a legitimate right to file for benefits.
Now, what do you advise somebody who comes to you and says, my term of service is almost done, I'm getting ready to get out? You have some advice that you give them about their medical situation?
We tell you, we try to prep them for, you know, making claims if there is. So get your records, make sure you can document your service. If you think you have an issue, you know, particularly combat-related issue, where there may not be a record, you know, talk to your buddies, get statements about what happened when. As much as possible, you want to try to line up all this information so that you have it, so you can file. Because, and one of the things we see it with GIs about to process out, they cannot get their records because, well, it's not available yet, we're not done with it. They leave the service, the records stay there, and suddenly it's going to take them a while to get those records. So as much as possible, you try to keep copies of the records.
And if they're about to get out, Glenn, the other thing is we need to say, well, how much longer do you have on your enlistment period to get out? Do you have enough time enlisted where you can wade through this medical hold that you will be in while they determine if the Department of Defense will compensate you? If it's down to a month or 2 months, most of us would say it's probably not worth extending your enlistment period for that, and yet then we'll show them how they can apply for VA benefits.
Now, the Veterans Administration, the VA, has more benefits than a lot of people are aware of.
Yes.
And I know part of what you do is help people get things that they didn't know was possible.
Right.
Tell us what some of these other...
We've been dealing primarily with service-connected disability payments, but there are also there's the education benefits, medical care, home loans, and then a whole range of dependent benefits. I mean, those are I didn't know about these before I started this. For dependent parents, dependent children, education benefits for them. So there is this wide range. Dennis has the book here. It's readily available from the VA called Federal Benefits for Veterans, Dependents and Survivors. Mm-hmm. And it gives a full list of these things. Including
burial benefits as well.
Living assistance, benefits.
Mm-hmm. When you work with folks, one of the important concepts that you deal with is service-connected disability, and we've mentioned this already. Can you define what qualifies as a service-connected disability?
Okay. Well, there are three things that make up a service-connected disability. First is you have to have a diagnosis of a condition, disabling condition. The second is that you have to be able to cite some event that is reasonably related to it. And the third is to establish a linkage between that.
Okay.
So if you have no use of your arm because you were shot in the arm, you have this diagnosis that you can't use your arm. You have the medical record of this injury to your arm, and you can say it happened in combat. Therefore, it's service-connected. That's a simple version of it.
Yeah, and then the more interesting cases would
right.
You'd have to do more digging to make the connection.
And the closer that the person can file for benefits from the time that they exited the service, or ETS as we use the term,
yes.
within that 1 year's period, is easier for that person to file a claim.
And then,
go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean there are certain things like we just talked about. What I just described as a direct service connection. There is also what's an aggravated connection. In other words, you had a problem when you came into the service, but because of your service and the activity, it got worse. That's service-connected.
Okay.
There are a variety. Dennis just mentioned the presumptive injury or conditions that occur within a year of the service. There are also presumptive conditions related, say, to Agent Orange for Vietnam veterans, such as Parkinson's, ischemic heart disease. There's about 10 of them now.
Diabetes type 2.
Right. There are, and the same for Gulf War veterans. So some things are just simply presumptive.
That's the 250,000 people we talked about just in the state of Washington alone.
And so the term presumptive means that if you were there at that time and you develop this later, it's presumed that that's where you got it.
Yes.
And so it eases the burden of proof
for example,
on you.
I had diabetes type 2. I was not in country. I'm Vietnam era. I served in Alaska. Okay. My friend served in Vietnam, type 2 diabetes. He's covered.
Yeah. Okay.
Because of the relationship to Agent Orange exposure.
Yeah. And one of the other things too about the service-connected disability, they rate you on percentage from 0 to 100, 100 being you're totally disabled and can't earn a living. If you're rated 30% or more, then you qualify for, I think it's for a priority category of health care. In other words, if you have a 30% disability, you are guaranteed health care at the VA. Whereas anyone who doesn't can get health care, but if they run out of money, they get cut out off the list.
Okay. Let's talk just a bit about how to apply for VA benefits. If you could summarize a little bit, and then we can get into a bit more detail.
I can start the one thing off, and then I'll turn it over to Mark, who is the independent VA claims agent in our group.
Right.
A DD-214 is the document that every veteran gets when they exit the service, and generally we're looking at that DD-214 to see is it an honorable discharge or a general discharge under honorable conditions, because we can do that. That's the priority document that we look for. And if they don't have that document, then we show where they can help them to get that document. But they will need that with anything with the VA.
Right. But essentially that proves that they were in the service, that they have, they have a record of service. From there, they would take that to a VA regional office. The nearest one here is in Seattle. And depending on what it is they're looking for, I mean, the ideal claim would be, I have a physical condition that's disabling. So you want to have a diagnosis of that from a doctor saying, this is as likely as not a result of military service. So now you have a condition, you've got a military, you got a record of service, you point to something that occurred. And a classic one is, we will look at that DD-214 and see like what awards he has. Combat action badge, combat infantry badge. Those things mean this person was in combat. So you can very often say, because they were in combat, these things have happened. So now you have the diagnosis, you have the DD-214. You can fill out form, VA form 21-526EZ. That's the
6 pages.
short form. It just kind of lists out what you have, and you can submit that. And if you have everything in place, they can process it.
Now, if they're out of the service, then we say you go to the doctor or any place that you've been admitted, and if you can get the doctor's statement, say, and Mark already used the term, it is as likely as not that, fill in the blank, and that will help them when they apply for the VA benefits. And then the VA will call that person in for the interview, and we'll have the separate things, but they will have those records.
And VA may want to do their own examination, which they can do.
Yeah, and you folks have emphasized in your earlier work that it's good to get the documents ready as early.
Yes.
Get the don't just put in something and then wait and get something else later, because you're going to delay your thing. If you get as much stuff as you can at the outset, it'll make things go quicker.
Including statements from your friends. We call them buddy statements, who noticed something happened at a certain period of time. They were there, or they heard this person complaining of this ailment at a certain time, and then that could be dated back to when this injury took place.
Right. So you're so-and-so was complaining that his left shoulder was hurting, but he had not complained about it before that particular incident where he got the injury, and he's been mentioning it. Or a spouse that talks about PTSD behaviors after deployment versus behaviors before.
Exactly.
And that can document, so even like a spouse or a parent or a sibling or somebody can be a statement that helps document PTSD.
And sometimes you can be admitted to an ER for whatever, and then the doctor's statement says this person has PTSD on one of their statements where they're filling out everything. They may have an eating disorder, some of the other type of things that they came in under. But that statement, PTSD, and it's signed by a doctor, then that becomes documentation that we help them assemble.
And from there, the process goes into the regional office where they will make a decision and say yes, no. They will say, okay, if it's yes, then they will say, here's how we rate it, and inform the veteran. And at that point, the veteran can accept it, or they can disagree. And then that gets into a whole process of appeals and re-reviews at the regional office, and then it can continue on to the Board of Veterans Appeals, to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Affairs. And one thing to point out, that this process is supposed to be non-adversarial at the regional office and even at the Board of Veterans Appeals. Once it gets into the Court of Appeals for Veterans Affairs, it becomes adversarial. But VA is supposed to be somewhat like workers' comp. The idea is, we're here to make you whole. It doesn't quite always work that way, which is why we have advocates and attorneys involved in the process.
Right.
But as much as you can get in place early on, the faster it will go.
And you folks have mentioned that if somebody's looking at benefits for spouses, survivors, dependents, whatever, that they may need to get documentation about birth certificates or marriage licenses or whatever, and that those were available through
and divorce statements as well.
Those, those kinds of things, and those were available from a county health department or the state Department of Health has vital records.
Well, now with Agent Orange exposure affecting some 226,000 in the state of Washington, many of these people are dying off now because of those ailments. Their dependents and their survivors can be compensated.
And if they know about it.
If they knew about it.
And that's the problem, is most people don't know about it.
Yeah. And we've had people that the husband received VA benefits, then died, but the wife and the daughters knew nothing about it, and
they took the burial benefits, got the
was
flag,
it,
and that was it.
Yeah. And some of these claims come in many years later. You
Yes.
told me you're working with a guy who had been bitten by a rat in Korea in
Korea.
1955 or something.
And that started a whole chain of events. They denied him compensation originally, and he appealed that, and he got a little, and he's still appealing it. He's finally gotten much of his claim, but he's still saying, well, you're only giving me back to a few years ago. I put this claim in many years ago. So it can go on. I think in his case, it's over 40 years.
Well, and Mark, you can tell your own story about, you filed for PTSD and 30 years after the fact?
Yeah, 30 years after the fact, and was rated for it.
Well, there's we've mentioned the Gulf War syndrome and Agent Orange, and we haven't mentioned depleted uranium, but these are weapons and problems from past wars, and in so many of these cases, the government has avoided responsibility. They were denying that there was anything like Gulf War syndrome. Oh no, this doesn't exist. That's just a
Agent
statistical
Orange was
fluke.
not a problem.
They denied that, and they were just there's this long pattern where the government refuses to take responsibility for what it's doing to people, and they're still dragging their feet on depleted uranium, which is causing all kinds of problems for people here as well as people in the countries where that's been used.
Well, this highlights the total cost of war, which is the thing that motivates Mark and myself as Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, is the total cost of war.
Is not just what you pay for the bullets and bombs.
Right. It goes on forever.
And it goes on and on and on, and it affects others around you.
Yeah. Well,
and people need to know about
right.
those costs.
Right. You mentioned that the year with the highest cost of paying for World War II veterans was 1993.
Right. That was the peak year for paying medical claims for World War II veterans. So close to 50 years after the fact, we're still paying for it.
Yeah.
And something to keep in mind about the current wars is, World War II, I think the killed to wounded ratio was something like 1 to 3. In Vietnam, it was 1 to 4. Because of the better medical care in the current wars, it's 1 to 15. So you have many people coming back who are severely wounded who are going to require this kind of care well into the future.
Right.
So even though you don't have the mass mobilization that you had in World War II, just all the casualties are going to add up.
Right. So the people who are the fiscal hawks, the deficit hawks, the people who want to cut benefits, cut education, cut environmental care, cut children's services, and all that. They need to recognize that wars are causing costs. If they want to get serious about cutting the federal deficit, they need to look at cutting off wars at the outset. Don't do the wars.
And one of the
you save
things
trillions.
that Olympia FOR is into is bring our billions home. And Mark and I are into this.
That's right.
And we have a unique experience of saying, as veterans,
Yeah.
we are very much for this.
Right.
Let's close all these 83 different countries that we have foreign bases in, bring these people home. We
Right.
can take care of the veterans that need the care, and plus provide the services you mentioned.
Right. If we could stop the current wars, we'd save trillions down the road.
And that's why, just after the Iraq War, Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Belimes wrote it was the $2 trillion war. I think it's now the $3 trillion war. Something else that Dennis Kucinich mentioned is that when you talk about programs, healthcare, education, they always say, how are you going to pay for it? But they never ask that about the war.
Right. Yeah. There's that double standard.
Yes.
We mentioned early in the program the work that you do at Coffee Strong. I want to just mention a bit more about that. Currently, as we tape the program in early 2011, you're up there, one or both of you are up there 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. pretty much every Friday.
Yes.
And I want to give the location and the address. It's off of I-5. It's south of Tacoma, Lakewood, exit 122. If you take exit 122, go west, turn right, which would be north, onto Union. Look for Coffee Strong on the right. It's near a Subway sandwich shop. The address is 15109 Union Avenue Southwest in Lakewood. And it's important to know that your volunteer work is available for people And so somebody watching the program might, either themselves or somebody they know or somebody they're related to, might need what you have to offer.
Well, and we leave resources there. For instance, we have DVDs on successfully filing VA claims benefits.
Okay.
And we have a number of those at Coffee Strong.
Okay.
And so when people come in and they say, oh, well, Mark and Dennis aren't here on Wednesday, but here's a DVD, it's an hour's program.
Yeah.
It was filmed here actually in Thurston Community Television Studio.
Right.
And they can take that home and watch it, or they can call us if it's a critical issue.
Yeah. Both of you, and I've watched it, it's very good, very informative. Both of you are active in the peace movement, and why are you volunteering so much time to help active duty soldiers and military veterans?
Well, in my case, it's it's a way of giving back. I have skills that I've developed, working as an investigator in the public sector. I know my way around bureaucracy. It doesn't scare me. I can find my way through it. I can help them figure it out and make the claim. And it's also a way of, I'm trying to address the full cost of the war.
And that really is the issue that drives me, is the full cost of war needs to be addressed, and those that have been affected by war should be compensated for that, and that motivates me. And perhaps that will have some impact on people considering the next war, which I'm already against.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Also, something that's in the news recently, we just saw the death of the last World War I veteran.
Yeah.
And in the stories about it, they point out how, they got nothing when they came home.
Oh, yeah.
And even after World War II, when the World War II vets got very generous benefits, World War I veterans still couldn't get claims.
Well, there was an effort during the Depression for World War I veterans to go to Washington, D.C. and press vigorously to get the bonuses that were promised to them. And
for 1945.
And they were rebuffed and violently rebuffed.
Yes.
And so that,
So we've learned at least something. We know
Yeah.
that we need to do something for the veterans, but I don't know that we necessarily do enough. And clearly, World War II veterans got excellent benefits. Vietnam veterans, not quite so good. More recently, we have a new GI Bill that does go back more toward the World War II type benefits.
yeah.
Mark and I say we are anti-war, but pro-soldier. And that means we are for, as you address, the humanity of all of us there. And we are for these people and try to see what we can do to help them in their situation.
Right, and as I mentioned at the outset of the program, one of the things that is a recurring theme is that we all share a common humanity and we're all in this together. And it's not a surprise that two peace activists like yourselves are volunteering in this way, or that we're covering your story on this peace-related TV program. And I know you did a Veterans for Peace program on the topic that this was related to. But there are a lot of occasions in this story where peace folks and military folks have collaborated, certainly in working against Agent Orange and the dioxins, where you had peace people, environmentalists, epidemiologists, military folks, veterans, all working on that together, trying to force the government to do the right thing. Peace folks and veterans worked on Gulf War syndrome, trying to get the government to take responsibility on that. We worked on depleted uranium. And so there's a lot that we have in common, and there is a lot of collaboration.
And it goes back quite some time. I mean, during Vietnam, we had Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
Oh, yeah.
There were very powerful protests against the war. Veterans for Peace is a group that grew out of that. And we as veterans, we could speak with a certain level of credibility.
Right. You also, Mark, went back to Vietnam in December 2010.
Yes.
Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Sure. I wanted to go back to do something constructive. And I was able to arrange an opportunity to work in the English language department of Da Nang University. And at that point, I had a chance to see Vietnam in a very different light, a country at peace, very vibrant group of young people, very active. I mean, I know the country still has many challenges, but it was so different than what I saw in the war because here this time around I actually got to meet Vietnamese and talk to them.
Right.
I like to say the first time around I was like I never left the U.S. because I never was out. I never engaged the Vietnamese culture. So it gave me a chance to see Vietnam in a whole different perspective.
Yeah. I want to do just a little bit about conscientious objection, which is an issue that comes up for people in the military, as it does when people are thinking about the draft. Federal law has, since 1940, allowed for conscientious objections, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that is. And in the military, there's a procedure to invoke that and work the process to get out, but it's the criteria for what qualifies as a conscientious objector that most people, I think, don't understand. You don't need to be a complete pacifist. In fact, Muhammad Ali, who was the world heavyweight boxing champion, successfully was declared a conscientious objector after some difficulty, and he was a heavyweight boxing champion. But there's a difference between boxing, where you have rules, you're not trying to kill somebody, versus being in war. So you don't need to be a total pacifist. You don't need to have a religion with a capital G, God. You have to have that deep sense in your heart that you can't participate in war because of your beliefs, your conscience, but it can have unconventional beliefs. It doesn't have to be something that's a standard orthodox kind of thing. So more people qualify than otherwise might think, but it's not just like saying, oh, I don't want war, or war is stupid, or war is expensive or messy, so I don't want to do it. That's not sufficient. It's got to be at that deep conscientious level where the beliefs are sort of as serious as those who are conventionally religious holding beliefs.
And we're seeing people coming back after 2, 3, and 4 deployments that are asking questions now like, what do you know about conscientious objector claims or status? So those type of questions are coming through, and the GI rights hotline helps them with that information.
And there's always a sense that, well, you chose to go in the military, you've already been over there and you fought, so how can you be a conscientious objector? And the point is that at a certain point you realize, I don't believe in this. This does violate a very deeply held belief.
Right, and people, any of us at any time during our lives has some experience that will move you in some way. Somebody will have some experience and it changed their life in some way. And so certainly somebody who's been in war can have that deep level spiritual turnaround that says, this is just completely wrong, my conscience won't let me do this anymore. And that's perfectly fine. So I just want to make sure that people know that, and again, more information about this is available at the GI Rights Hotline. I'll give you that number and website again. It's toll free, 877-447-4487. The website is www.girightshotline.org. And if people miss that, they can contact us. We'll have the Olympia FOR contact information at the end of the program. Both of you are active with the organization Veterans for Peace, and I wonder if you could tell us about the overall purposes and principles of Veterans for Peace nationally, and then let's talk about the local. But national, what's Veterans for Peace all about?
Well, it's a national organization of people who served in the military and also supporters. You don't have to be a veteran to be a member of Veterans for Peace.
You have associate members?
Associate members, yes.
And there are 5 basic principles, some of which I might remember, one of which is to end war as an instrument of national policy. Second is to care for those who have been injured and harmed by war, victims of war. What are some of the others?
Well, it was the educate the people about the cost of war.
Yeah.
And it was founded in 1985. Members participated and worked in Central America when we were intervening there, and have done we're in Iraq providing drinking water prior to the war. I was not a member of it until this particular war. I met some veterans in Phoenix when I was living there and joined up, and I've been active ever since. And one of the things I like about being a veteran for peace as opposed to being a Vietnam veteran against the war is I want to be for peace. We present ourselves, we're not anti, we are in favor of peace, and we want to see that as a form of national policy.
Locally, both of you are active with Veterans for Peace Chapter 109, the Rachel Corey chapter here in Olympia. Tell us, you've done a lot of good stuff over the years. What are some of the accomplishments over the years?
We continue to have a monthly program at the last Thursday of the month on KAOS, which is our community access radio station. And we also have a monthly television program, which we call the Veterans Hour. And it's produced here in the studios at TCTV. And then we, afterwards, once it's been shown, we put that out on Blip TV so that people anywhere that have an internet connection can see that program. Very similar to what FOR has there.
And they can watch that through the website, www.vfp109rcc.org.
Yeah.
And
you go there and then you can click on a whole thing and you go down to where it talks about the various television programs and it has that. Yeah.
And you've sponsored peace activities locally, peace rallies and events and speakers and all kinds of things.
We've been active in many of the observances of the anniversaries of the war. We have worked with FOR. We're on various campaigns. This year we're on Bringing Our Billions Home. In past years we did Arlington Northwest. And certainly over the past couple of years, one of our major efforts has been supporting Coffee Strong. Working with the current generation of GIs to resist war.
See, as a local chapter, we're really trying to find where can we have the most credible voice as veterans. And it's one thing to vigil, which we still do. But are there other things that we can become involved in to where we can really help people?
Well, and have your own niche, so that there are some things that you folks can do as veterans that other folks can't do. And your work at Coffee Strong certainly is one of them. And when you do the Arlington Northwest, the display of the grave markers to simulate those who died, that's powerful and credible.
And we've become involved with the Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers coming up very shortly. Matter of fact, this weekend, which will be too late for our viewing audience.
But there'll be another one, I'm
sure. We have quarterly days of listening, to where we actually provide the internet connections to Afghanistan. And so people from many, many countries talk to these young people over there and their desire to have peace. And, their theme was, why not love? And so we become involved in helping to support the mechanism to put on these days of listening.
In fact, one of the highlights of my trip to Vietnam was joining in from Da Nang.
I was just going to mention that I was down at Traditions when we had the computer hookup, and you and your wife Maggie called in from Vietnam on that as part of that. We had people from all over the world. That was really something. One of the things that you want to do when the National Veterans for Peace holds their annual conference in Portland, Oregon, is to have a workshop on the kinds of work that you're doing and urge that more of that happen elsewhere.
Well, and one of the things that we found out is not every organization is blessed like we are here in Thurston County to have access to tell our story on community access television or a radio station. And so they've said, tell us how you do this, because you don't have that many people in your chapter. We're not a huge chapter like others might be. How do you do that? So that's one thing that we do. And then they found out that, hold it, you have training on how to become a veterans benefit specialist, or there. Others don't. They send them to other chapters trying to figure out how they can get help. This is something that we feel we have a possibility. So Mark and I are proposing to do in a workshop at this national conference.
Also, one thing to mention is the National Veterans for Peace is supporting our work by purchasing reference materials for us.
Matter of fact, you want to show that one particular
book?
We have two books.
This is one of two that are essential to the work. And it's not something you can easily look up on the internet.
Only about 2,000 pages per book.
And it costs about $200 a set, and they bought us the set.
And it comes out every year.
Yeah, you have to buy a new
But
one
if you're
every
going to
year.
help a veteran file a successful
you've
claim,
gotta
you
know
need
your
to
stuff.
And you
Yeah.
do not want to be working with a 2007 edition,
Right, right.
Yeah.
because it's probably the same, but you don't want to take that chance.
So we got just a few minutes to wrap things up. I want to see what insights you may have of things that people could do to help. Folks watching the program might be interested and wonder how can they plug in.
One of the things is to ask a person are they a veteran? And if so, have you ever filed for VA benefits as a result of your experience? It's amazing how many people we know that are veterans, but we never think about asking them, have you filed anything
Right.
with the VA before? That would be one thing that anyone in our viewing audience could do, is just to listen and to ask.
And I would add that just to think about, the experience that veterans go through in their military service, that they see things that no human being should really be ever exposed to. And that does, like Dennis said earlier on, it changes them. To be aware of that and to help them find the assistance they need. Sometimes there's some resistance to that, so you can't push them, but you can certainly encourage them and be supportive.
And I would hope that people would just be aware and informed of the kinds of fresh ways of looking at things that we've tried to do during this hour that may be different from the way people who see themselves as peace activists commonly do, or the way that people who might be veterans commonly do. But whatever situation you're in, recognize fresh ways of looking at things.
Yes.
Could each of you offer a closing comment?
Actually, my comment would be, I don't think I will ever live to see it, but I think the ultimate goal would be live in a world where there are no veterans.
I could echo that, Mark. I never wanted to be a veteran. I got the opportunity not to worry about what clothes I wore for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I would encourage any young people that are out there that are not sure about what they're going to do for their education benefits in the future, do not consider the military as a way to earn money to go to college.
Right, thank you. Yeah, the recruitment pitch is very one-sided, and somebody who's thinking about that needs to be an informed consumer and get other information and recognize that the recruiter is a salesperson who's trying to sell you something and not telling you the downside.
Yes.
So I want to thank Dennis Mills and Mark Fleming. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. War costs everyone in many ways. The U.S.'s current wars are bankrupting our nation financially and turning world opinion against us politically. Beyond that, wars are costing our nation its soul. During this hour, we've focused specifically on how war hurts the people who fight and their families. Despite people's glib rhetoric that soldiers are heroes, the truth is that every combat soldier is wounded in several ways. Our nation must be mature enough to recognize these human costs and responsible enough to cover the financial and other costs. Wars damage the people on all sides, and we must take responsibility to heal the people on all sides. I respect the work that our two guests, Dennis Mills and Mark Fleming, are doing to help active duty GIs and military veterans to protect their rights and to get the benefits that they deserve. You can find one or both of them most Fridays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Coffee Strong, 15109 Union Avenue Southwest in Lakewood. Take I-5 to exit 122, go west, turn right, that's north, onto Union, and look for Coffee Strong on the right near a Subway sandwich shop. And if you're watching this program after the spring of 2011, the dates and times and location may change. But anyway, I want to thank Dennis and Mark. Thank the folks who've been watching. You can get information about a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093 or visit www.olympiafor.org. We're all one human family and we all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.